I need to talk about what happened to me 3 weeks ago, because I haven't been able to sleep right since, and my girlfriend thinks I'm losing it. Maybe writing it down will help. Maybe someone out there has experienced something like this. I'm a traveling nurse, which means I spend a lot of time driving between rural hospitals, sometimes through stretches of road that don't see another car for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. I'm used to driving late. I'm used to the dark. I've never been the kind of person who gets spooked easily. That changed on October 14th. I was driving home from a 12-hour shift at a small hospital about 2 hours outside of Roanoke, Virginia. It was almost 1 in the morning. Route 9 is this long, winding 2-lane road that cuts through dense forest with no streetlights, no guardrails, and almost no cell service. I'd driven it dozens of times. That night, there was a thin fog sitting low on the pavement, just enough to make everything feel a little dreamlike. About 40 minutes into the drive, my headlights caught something on the shoulder. A woman. She was standing perfectly still, facing the road, wearing a pale blue nightgown, no shoes. Her hair was hanging in her face. My first thought was that she'd been in an accident or maybe wandered away from a house. I slowed down and pulled over about 50 feet past her. I looked in my rearview mirror and she was already walking toward my car. Not running, walking, steady and deliberate. I rolled my window down about 2 inches, just enough to talk. She came up to the driver's side and stopped. She didn't lean down to look at me. She just stood there. I said, "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. I asked again. Nothing. Then, very slowly, she bent down and looked at me through the gap in the window. Her face was completely blank, no expression at all, but her eyes were wide open, so wide it looked uncomfortable. She whispered, "Can I get in the back?" Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't desperate, it was calm, practiced, like she'd said it many times before. I glanced in my rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it. Movement in the tree line, about 20 feet behind my car. A figure, then another. 2 people standing just inside the edge of the woods, perfectly still, watching. I didn't say a word. I put my car in drive and hit the gas. As I pulled away, I looked in my mirror one more time. The woman hadn't moved. She was standing in the middle of the road now, still staring. But the 2 figures from the tree line, they had stepped out onto the pavement. One of them was holding something long. I couldn't tell what it was, and I didn't want to know. I drove 80 miles an hour for the next 20 minutes. When I finally got cell service, I pulled into a gas station and called 911. I told the dispatcher everything. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the exact mile marker. I told her. She said they've had 2 other calls about a woman on that stretch in the past year. Neither caller had stopped. I asked her what happened to the people who might have stopped before. She couldn't say. I asked if she meant she didn't know or she couldn't tell me. She didn't answer that either. I took a different route home the next week, added an extra hour to my drive. I don't care. I keep thinking about the woman's face, how empty it was, how she whispered that question like a script, and those figures in the trees. They weren't hiding, they were waiting. They were positioned behind where a car would stop if someone pulled over to help. I looked up local news for that area. There's nothing. No missing persons, no crime reports, nothing. But someone on a local Facebook group mentioned that a car was found abandoned on Route 9 about 6 months ago. Doors open, engines still running, personal belongings still inside. The owner was never found. I don't drive at night anymore. I tell my supervisor I have a medical reason. I don't care if they believe me. I know what I saw. Those people had done that before, and the thing that haunts me most, the thing that keeps me up at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling, is wondering how many people said yes when she asked to get in the back. I worked the night shift at a grocery store for about 8 months last year, and something happened during my last week that made me quit without notice. I've never told anyone the full story because, honestly, I don't think anyone would believe me. But this is the internet, so here goes. The store was a small regional chain in southern Ohio. Nothing special. The night shift was just me and one other person, usually a guy named Derek. Our job was restocking shelves, cleaning floors, and receiving any early morning deliveries. The store closed at 11 and we worked until 6. Most nights were boring, mindless work with a podcast in one ear, but the store had a weird energy after midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder when the place was empty. The back hallway leading to the stockroom was always colder than it should have been. Little things you learn to ignore. The night it happened, Derek called in sick. My manager said I'd be alone, but to just focus on stocking the aisles and leave the back for tomorrow. Fine by me. I locked the front doors at 11, watched the last customer leave, and started working. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the walk-in freezer door open and close. It's a heavy steel door with a distinct sound, this low metallic thud followed by the seal releasing with a hiss. I was in aisle 6, halfway across the store. I stopped and listened. Nothing else. I figured the door hadn't been latched properly and the compressor pressure popped it open. It had happened before. I walked to the back and checked. The door was closed. I opened it, looked inside. Rows of boxes, frost on the walls, my breath visible, empty. I shut it firmly, heard the latch click, and went back to work. At 2:15 it happened again. The thud, the hiss. This time I was closer, maybe 2 aisles away from the back. I walked faster. When I got to the freezer, the door was open about 6 inches. A thin trail of fog was drifting across the floor. I looked inside again. Empty. But this time I noticed something I hadn't before. On the floor, near the back corner behind a stack of pallets, was a sleeping bag. It was rolled out flat, with a pillow and a crumpled blanket. Next to it was a plastic bag with food wrappers and an empty water bottle. My whole body went cold, and it had nothing to do with the freezer. Someone had been living in there, or at least sleeping in there. I backed out slowly and pulled out my phone to call my manager. No answer. I called the non-emergency police line and told them what I found. They said they'd send someone out. While I waited, I went to the security office to check the cameras. We had 6 monitors showing different angles. Most of them were working fine. The one that covered the back hallway and the freezer entrance was turned to face the ceiling. Someone had physically tilted the camera up, so it recorded nothing but ceiling tiles. I hadn't noticed because I never checked the cameras. That wasn't part of my job. Then I looked at the monitor for the stockroom. I saw movement. Someone was in the stockroom, walking slowly between the shelves. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't rushing. He moved like someone who knew the layout. He turned and looked directly up at the camera. I couldn't make out his features because the image was grainy and the lighting was bad, but he was smiling. Then he walked out of frame, toward the hallway, toward me. I grabbed my keys and ran for the front door. I didn't look behind me. I unlocked it, got to my car, and locked myself inside. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. They searched the store. The sleeping bag was gone. The plastic bag was gone. The camera in the back hallway was back in its normal position. They found an emergency exit in the stockroom that had been tampered with. The alarm had been disabled and the lock had been rigged so it could be opened from outside. They told me it looked like someone had been using the store after hours for a while. Maybe weeks, maybe longer. They dusted for prints, but I never heard the results. I think about that man on the camera every single day. How he smiled, how comfortable he looked. How many nights did I work alone in that store while he was 20 feet away behind a freezer door, waiting in the dark?
And the thing that really gets me, Derek called in sick that night. Derek, who had the keys, Derek, who always volunteered for the shifts when we received late deliveries through that back door. I texted him the next day. He never replied. His number was disconnected a week later.
I want to preface this by saying I'm not a paranoid person. I grew up in a quiet suburb. I've always gotten along with my neighbors, and I've never had a reason to feel unsafe in my own home. That changed when Gerald moved in next door. He showed up about 14 months ago, bought the house from an estate sale after the previous owner passed away. Gerald was probably in his mid-60s, thin, weathered face, always wearing the same khaki pants and flannel shirts. He was polite but distant, the kind of neighbor who waves but never stops to talk. I didn't think anything of it at first. Some people are just private. The first thing I noticed was the garden. Within a few weeks of moving in, Gerald tore up almost the entire backyard and started planting. I'm not talking about a vegetable garden or some flower beds. He dug deep, wide plots across the whole yard. He worked on it every single day, sometimes late at night with a headlamp on. My wife window looks down at his yard, and I'd see the light bobbing around at 2, 3 in the morning. My wife thought he was just eccentric. Retired guy with a hobby, she said. I wanted to believe that. But the garden never really grew anything. Months went by and the plots stayed mostly bare, patchy, uneven soil. No rows, no structure. He just kept digging and turning the dirt. I'd watch him carry bags of something from his garage, white bags, heavy-looking, and mix whatever was inside into the soil. I assumed it was fertilizer or lime. Then the smell started. It was faint at first, a sweet, sickly odor that would drift over the fence on warm evenings. My wife said it was probably compost or manure. I've smelled both. This was different. It was thicker somehow. It stuck in your throat. Around month 5, I noticed Gerald started getting visitors. Not normal visitors. People would pull into his driveway late at night, always after midnight, stay for maybe 20 minutes, then leave. Never the same car twice. I started paying attention to the license plates out of pure curiosity. They were from different states: Tennessee, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. Once, I saw a man carry a large duffel bag into Gerald's garage. He came out 10 minutes later without it. I told my wife I thought something was off. She told me to stop spying on the neighbor. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't stop. One afternoon, Gerald was out front, and I walked over to be friendly, made small talk, asked about the garden. He smiled, thin, tight smile, and said he was enriching the soil for next season. I asked what he was growing. He looked at me for a long moment, just looked at me, like he was deciding something. Then he said, "Everything goes back to the earth eventually," and walked inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning that sentence over in my head. At about 3 in the morning, I got up and looked out the window. Gerald was in the garden. He was standing completely still in the middle of the yard. No headlamp, no shovel, just standing there in the dark. And he was looking up, directly at my window. I stepped back so fast I knocked a glass off the nightstand. The next morning, I called the county non-emergency line and said I was concerned about odors coming from a neighbor's property. They sent someone from code enforcement 3 days later. The officer walked the property line, talked to Gerald for about 15 minutes, and left. He told me the smell was probably from organic composting and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Case closed. Except it wasn't, because 2 weeks later, a woman showed up at Gerald's door in the middle of the day. She was crying. I was working from home and heard her through my open window. She was asking about someone named Michael. She kept saying, "He came here. I know he came here. Where is he?" Gerald spoke to her very quietly. I couldn't make out his words. She left, still crying. I never saw her again. 6 weeks after that, Gerald moved out. Overnight. No moving truck, no for sale sign, just gone. The house sat empty. I called the real estate company listed on the county records. They said the property had been surrendered and they were arranging cleanup.
3 months later, this was 2 weeks ago, a landscaping crew came to clear the yard for the new listing. They got about 4 feet into the first plot before they stopped digging and called the police. I'm not going to say what they found because the investigation is ongoing, but there are now 7 evidence markers in that backyard, and the forensics team has been there every day for 12 straight days. The police interviewed me twice. They asked me how long Gerald had lived there. They asked about the late-night visitors. They asked if I had any of those license plate numbers. I gave them everything I had. They haven't found Gerald. His name isn't even Gerald. The ID he used to buy the house was stolen from a dead man in West Virginia. Nobody knows who he really is. I lie awake at night thinking about that moment at 3 in the morning when he stood in the yard looking at my window. He knew I was watching. He always knew. And the thing I can't stop asking myself is this: if code enforcement hadn't come, if the landscaping crew hadn't dug that deep, how long would he have kept going? And what was in those white bags he carried from the garage? I already know the answer. I think I always did.